This is Rhonda Brooks of Farm Journal Media, and I'm here today with Aaron Hager, University of Illinois Extension Weed Specialist. And Aaron, you've been talking to us here at the Bayer Ag Issues Forum about the issue of multiple resistance issues in water hemp. Tell us a little bit about what that problem is.
Well, the multiple resistance is really an area that we have a lot of concern with, especially going into this upcoming growing season. And some of the survey work that the Weed Science Group at the University of Illinois has conducted over the last several years has really indicated that quite a few of our populations of water hemp around the state of Illinois demonstrate resistance not to just one particular herbicide family, but in many cases two and perhaps even three different herbicide families. And the multiple resistance is the concern because when you begin to stack these types of resistances either in the field, for example, or the worst case scenario is when you begin to stack these types of resistances within an individual plant.
Okay.
The concern, of course, is that there may not be many viable options to try to control these populations and once they emerge from the soil, because much of the resistance that we see in water hemp is demonstrated to many of the common foliar applied or post-emergence herbicides that farmers use, particularly in soybeans.
Okay.
So the multiple resistance is certainly much more of a challenge than is resistance, say, to just one herbicide. Usually in both corn and soybeans, we may have multiple herbicide families that we could rely on to control a population. So if we've evolved resistance, let's say, to herbicide A, maybe we have the option of using herbicide B that would still effectively control it because it doesn't demonstrate resistance to B. And vice versa, if we had resistance to B, we could use herbicide A.
So traditionally, you would go back and forth between those two products.
But now the thing that we are beginning to be very concerned is even more common than that scenario, is when we start to stack, or I guess I should say that the species itself begins to stack these resistances together within the same plant. So now all of a sudden we have resistance in one plant to A and to B.
Okay.
So really then the number of options that a farmer might have to try to control that become very, very limited because we effectively have reduced the choices that could be used to control these multiple resistant populations.
How widespread do you think these multiple, in Illinois, how widespread is this problem?
Well, we think it's becoming even more widespread. We think every season that selection continues to occur, we will see more of the stacking happen. And one of the reasons why it's very easy for the species to stack these resistances together is because it's a dioecious species, which means that any water hemp plant in a field is either a male or a female.
Okay.
So in order for the females to make seed, she has to receive pollen from the males. But that's not to say that she only has to receive pollen from one male. She could be pollinated by literally dozens and dozens of different male plants. The take home is that because of this biology, and we know that virtually all these types of resistances that we see move in the seed, but they can also move in the pollen. So you can begin to stack these different types of resistances because of where the pollen donor plants come from. So we may have one single female that demonstrates one type of resistance. She may have pollen shed coming to fertilize her flowers from a male plant over here that has resistance to a different herbicide, maybe a second one right here. So now all of a sudden she may be producing seeds of plants that have two or perhaps three different types of resistance.
I see. I didn't realize that. I wanted to ask you too, are you hearing from any of your colleagues in other states that were, of this problem? Can you give me a sense of that?
Well, the water hemp in general is becoming really one of the dominant broadleaf species across a lot of the Midwest. It's been a problem for many, many years in Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, but we certainly see more of this now cropping up for folks in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and weed scientists in Indiana are beginning to talk more and more about the water hemp movement into that state as well.
And does that include the multiple resistance issue?
There are certainly resistance issues in all those states. Now, how widespread the multiple resistance is in those particular states, the weeds folks in those states are probably doing those screens as we speak, but in all honesty, I'm not really quite sure how extensive the two-way, perhaps three-way resistance might be.
Okay. What's the message as far as going into this season? What action can farmers take, or what would you recommend?
Well, the first thing it really is to accept that this is happening, that this is real. This could be the breakout year on many, many more acres in 2012 for farmers who think, well, I haven't seen it before, so I'm not going to be concerned about it this year. That's usually the scenario that really leads to a lot of challenges in the season. Had a farmer last year in Champaign County called about, I don't know, middle of June, July. And he said, I farmed this we farmed this as a family farm for over 100 years. He said, I've never had water hemp in this field. He said, this year, I don't know where it came from, but I can't get it under control. And that's really how it can actually happen. It can happen that quickly. So that's the first step. The second step is diversifying how you try to manage this. We're going to see more use of residual herbicides in both corn and soybean. We're going to see more tank mix combinations for post-applied products. Either of those by themselves are not a complete solution to this. It's going to have to be a much more integrated system as we move forward because, quite frankly, many of the options that we have, the effectiveness of those have really been compromised because of the stacked and multiple resistance.
This is kind of a tag-on question, if you will, but something that I've heard mention of is farmers have told me that some of the resistance problems that they have, they think they've acquired from when they purchased equipment from other states where resistance is more prevalent. What are you hearing in that regard?
It's very possible because many of these species that are the predominant ones in terms of frequency, if you would, occurrence, distribution, are very small-seeded species. And these small-seeded species typically produce an abundant amount of seed, and these seeds can easily be lodged in nooks and crannies, if you would.
It's hard to get those combines completely cleaned out.
Exactly. Mud on tractor tires is a very effective way to move seed from one field to the next field.
All right. Has anyone asked you that question? And if they have, what have you been telling them in that regard?
Well, it's somebody did ask, he said, well, do you think I should buy a piece of equipment that comes from an area where some of these very challenging species, for example, Palmer amaranth? And I said, there's really not a simple answer to that. I think it's very important that you recognize that seed movement in equipment can happen. I don't know if there's really a good question on sanitation or cleaning of equipment that would really render any seed in there non-viable. I don't know if we really know how to do that yet. But certainly at least the recognition that this can happen. If you do make that purchase, I think it would be very wise the following year to really monitor all those fields that equipment was used in the previous year and identify, hey, am I seeing something now in this field that I really haven't seen before? Do I have this one pigweed that really doesn't really look like a water hemp? I wonder what it is. And if it's a very rapidly growing plant, keep an eye on it. Try to get rid of it. Try to eradicate it from the field as best you could if that would happen.
All right. Well, Aaron, thank you for your time.
You betcha.